There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from being misunderstood for too long, from telling your story and watching people slowly pull away, from needing to be seen so desperately that the need itself becomes the cage you live in. If you've ever been accused of playing the victim, this is for you. And if you've ever loved someone who seems to live in permanent suffering, who finds crisis around every corner and blame in every direction, this is for you too. Because the truth about victim mentality is not what most people think. It is not laziness. It is not manipulation for the sake of power. At its deepest root, it is a survival story, a very old one, written in a language the person themselves often cannot read. Let's sit with that for a moment. Most people who chronically position themselves as victims are not doing it consciously. They are not waking up each morning and deciding to make everyone around them feel guilty. They are waking up in a body that learned very early that powerlessness was the only safe place to stand, that needing help was only acceptable when the wound was visible. That love came with conditions, and one of those conditions was suffering enough to deserve it. Think about what it means to grow up in an environment where your needs were consistently dismissed, where you expressed pain and were told you were being dramatic, or something genuinely unfair happened to you, and instead of being held, you were corrected. Over time, something shifts in the architecture of how you experience the world. You stop trusting that anyone will respond to a quiet ask. You learn that ordinary sadness doesn't get noticed, but extraordinary suffering does. And so you begin without ever choosing to amplify, to escalate, to make the wound visible enough that no one can ignore it. This is not a character flaw. This is a child learning the only language their environment would respond to. Psychologists call this a form of learned helplessness, a concept rooted in research by Martin Seligman, though lived long before it had a name. When a person repeatedly experiences situations where their actions have no real effect on outcomes, something inside them begins to stop trying, not out of weakness, but out of exhausted logic. The brain adapts. It begins to conclude that effort is pointless, that agency is an illusion. And once that belief takes root, it becomes the lens through which every new experience gets filtered. So when something goes wrong, and things do go wrong, for everyone, the person with deeply embedded learned helplessness doesn't first ask, "What can I do about this?" They ask, "Why is this happening to me again?" And that tiny grammatical shift from agency to audience changes everything. But we have to go deeper than that. Because not everyone who experiences dismissal develops this pattern. So what else is at play? Attachment theory gives us another piece. Children who grew up with inconsistent caregivers, parents who were sometimes warm and sometimes cold, sometimes present and sometimes absent, often develop what's called an anxious attachment style. And one of the defining features of anxious attachment is hypervigilance to threat, a constant low hum of danger, a need to protest loudly when connection feels at risk, because quiet withdrawal never worked. The attachment system learned that the only way to be seen was to be loudly, visibly in need. This is where victim positioning becomes a form of protest. Not manipulation, but protest. A reaching out, a desperate signal fire lit in the dark that says, "I am here, please see me, please don't leave." And here's the heartbreaking part. It often works in the short term. Someone rushes in, someone comforts, someone stays, and the nervous system flooded with relief logs the experience as confirmation. This strategy is effective. The brain, which is always taking notes, writes it down, and the behavior deepens. Now layer on top of this something quieter, something that rarely gets discussed: the role of identity. When pain becomes the primary way a person knows themselves, it becomes dangerous to heal. This sounds strange. Why would someone resist the thing they say they want most? But consider, if you have spent years, decades even, organizing your sense of self around your wounds, around who hurt you and what you survived and how unfair the world has been, then healing isn't just a change in feeling. It's a death of identity, and the psyche doesn't distinguish between death and healing very well. It simply registers. This familiar self is disappearing. Danger, the victim story, as painful as it is also a home. It's a place where you know who you are, where you know what to say, where you know how others will respond. Moving beyond it requires stepping into a self that has not yet been defined, and that formless, undefined place is terrifying, especially for someone whose entire childhood was spent trying to become someone stable enough to survive. There is also the matter of responsibility, and this is the most uncomfortable part, the part that gets weaponized by people who lack empathy but which still deserves honest examination. When a person chronically positions themselves as victim, one of the secondary functions is the release from responsibility. Not a conscious choice, but a quiet one. Because if everything bad that happens is always someone else's fault, then you are also protected from the unbearable question, did I contribute to this? That question for someone with deep shame wounds is not just uncomfortable, it is annihilating. Because beneath the victim story very often is a bedrock of self-loathing so old and so foundational that any crack in the narrative threatens to flood the whole basement. The victim story is not just about external blame, it is armor against internal collapse. And so when you push back, when you try to introduce nuance, when you gently suggest that perhaps they played a part too, the response is not logic, it's panic in disguise, dressed in anger or tears or accusations, because what they heard wasn't your gentle challenge. They heard, you are to blame for everything, you are the bad one, and that old terrifying story, the one they've spent their whole life trying not to believe, suddenly feels like it might be true. This is why these conversations almost never work. Not because the person is unreachable, but because the wrong thing is being reached for. What they need isn't accountability presented as argument. What they need, first, is safety. Real safety. The felt sense that they will not be destroyed if they lower the armor. And that kind of safety is not built in a single conversation. It is built in years of consistent non-reactive presence. Most people don't have that to give. And that's not a failure either. That's human. Now let's talk about what this looks like from the inside. If you recognize any of this in yourself, if there's a part of you that sometimes wonders whether your suffering has become a story you're trapped in rather than a truth you're moving through, I want you to know something. That recognition is not evidence against you. It is the first light through the window. The person who is truly stuck in victim consciousness doesn't wonder about it. They are too defended. The wondering, the discomfort, the willingness to sit inside this video and consider the possibility that something in your pattern might be protecting an old wound rather than telling a current truth, that is already something different. That is already the beginning of agency. Because agency doesn't begin with grand action. It doesn't begin with waking up one morning and deciding to take full responsibility for your entire life. That is too much, too fast. The nervous system, which has spent years in a state of threat, can't make that leap. Agency begins with something much smaller. It begins with the question, what is one thing, even a tiny thing, within my power right now? Not all things, just one, and then asking it again the next day, and the day after. Slowly, the identity begins to reorganize itself around something other than helplessness. Not overnight, not without regression, but over time, the way a river slowly changes course, wearing new pathways through stone. There is also grief that must happen here. Real grief, not performed grief. Because underneath the victim story, there is almost always something genuinely unfair that happened. Something that deserved to be witnessed and wasn't. Something that deserved repair and never received it. The people who said you were dramatic may have actually been cruel. The loss you suffered may have actually been devastating. The injustice may have been real. Healing does not mean pretending otherwise. It does not mean releasing others from accountability for genuinely harmful things. It means learning to hold your real pain without making it the architecture of your entire self. It means letting the wound be real and also not letting it be the only real thing about you. This is perhaps the most delicate work a human being can do, because we live in a culture that is deeply uncomfortable with both extremes. On one side, it tells people to stop complaining, to move on, to not be so sensitive. On the other side, it sometimes creates echo chamber, where victimhood becomes identity, becomes community, and any challenge to it feels like betrayal. Neither extreme serves the soul. What serves the soul is something quieter, a slow turning toward the self, a gentle, persistent curiosity, a willingness to ask, who am I when I am not in pain? What do I want? Not just what do I fear? What do I have to offer? Not just what have I lost? These are not easy questions. For someone who has organized their inner world around suffering, they can feel almost nonsensical at first, like asking someone to describe a color they've never seen. But the asking still matters. The asking opens something. And for those of you who love someone caught in this pattern, who are exhausted from carrying the weight of someone else's perpetual crisis, who feel guilty for your frustration, and then frustrated by your guilt, I want to say something important. You cannot heal someone by sacrificing yourself on the altar of their pain. You cannot love someone out of a pattern that exists at a depth your love cannot reach without their own willingness to go there. What you can do is love them with limits. You can be present without being consumed. You can refuse to participate in the escalation while still refusing to abandon. You can say, gently and firmly, I see your pain. I'm not going anywhere. And also, I cannot keep absorbing what belongs to you to carry. That is not cruelty. That is the most honest form of love available in this situation. Because the paradox of rescuing someone from their helplessness is that every rescue confirms the helplessness. Every time you rush in and take the burden, the quiet message sent is, you're right. You couldn't have handled this. You are as fragile as your story says. Staying present without solving. That is the harder, truer gift. And here, near the end of this long, quiet walk together, I want to offer something that might be the most important thing of all. The psychology of victim mentality is not a sentence. It is not a permanent diagnosis of a broken person. It is a map of where someone's survival strategies took them, given the specific terrain of their early life, given the specific weather of their childhood, given the specific tools they had or didn't have access to, and maps can be redrawn. The person who was told they were too sensitive can learn that sensitivity is a form of intelligence. The person who learned that suffering was the only language that got a response can slowly learn other languages. The person who built their identity around their wounds can, over time, expand that identity to include their curiosity, their humor, their capacity for depth, their hard-won understanding of pain that most people will never know. The wound is real, the adaptation to the wound is understandable, and the journey beyond the adaptation, while it is slow and non-linear and sometimes unbearably frustrating, is one of the most meaningful things a human being can undertake. Not because suffering should be rushed past or minimized, but because you are more than what happened to you. You always were. That's not a thing people can take from you with their carelessness, or their cruelty, or their absence. It was always true, even when it couldn't be felt. You are not the story you needed in order to survive. You are the one who survived. And somewhere beneath the armor, beneath the narrative, beneath the exhausting performance of a pain that was once completely real, there is still a person who hasn't finished becoming themselves yet. That person is worth finding, even now, even here, even after everything.